Nerdrotic.com.
Looks like it's post-mortem week after the ending of G4, She-Hulk, and the Rings of Power, all abysmally failing for precisely the same reasons. And this reminds me of a line from Harold and Kumar: "The universe tends to unfold as it should."
Plus, I have a really large penis. That keeps me happy.
Will any of the organizations responsible for these disasters actually take responsibility for their own failures? Of course not. It's going to be circumstances, climate change, fascists, a vast right-wing conspiracy, the fans, the paying customers, anything but them. Amazon, for example, will just go out and state that the Rings of Power is a success without providing any actual data, and the Access media will go right along with them. The reason streaming services do not share any real viewer data, and I don't mean minutes watched or some estimates or things called samples, I mean how many people watched your show, is because for the vast majority of their content, it's insanely low. Otherwise, they would share it. And doing this over a long period of time with multiple products or content, it's risk averse. It's much easier to divide a fandom, divide culture, divide a country than harm the corporation. The Rings of Power bombed. And sure, a lot of people watched it at first. We already have data that they lost 40% of their audience from the first episode. From the Business Insider, the Rings of Power appears to be struggling to connect with younger viewers. And that's right, 71% of its audience was 35 years or older at the season 1 midway point, according to Nielsen. But the more important numbers are here. The 2-episode premiere of the Rings of Power was watched by 12.6 million viewers in the US in its first 3 days. Nielsen confirmed to Insider that the 3rd episode was watched by 7.47 million average viewers in the US in its first 3 days, though Nielsen only measures viewing on connected TVs, which doesn't include other devices like laptops. Yet, the percentages remain the same. It lost almost half of its audience. The Rings of Power just isn't any old failure. It's the one failure to rule them all. And as I stated in previous videos, there was a very good inside source that told me this couldn't be just a hit. The Rings of Power needed to be Stranger Things. In other words, it needs to chart for a very long time, and the way things are going, it won't be charting in 3 or 4 weeks. That's why after the 6th episode, there was a massive media push, I'm guessing, initiated by Amazon to change the narrative around this show. There was the now infamous Hollywood Reporter article with the "fans are patently evil" quote in it, and within the same 48 hours, we got a giant fluff piece on Jennifer Salke, head of Amazon Studios, who has a background in, you guessed it, marketing, who just so happens to also be the architect behind the biggest failure of all time, the billion-dollar series, $60 million an episode of complete garbage. And what did reflecting the world of the Los Angeles Amazon producers live in today, and the inclusion and the diversity get them? The single worst adaptation of all time. Simply put, a bad TV show. So bring on the damage control, or what the kids call today the cope. The Rings of Power had a halo effect on Amazon Video content, says Jennifer Salke, head of Amazon Video content. Let's see if Jennifer Salke, head of Amazon Prime Video, provides any actual data, but this wouldn't surprise me at all. I'm sure a lot of people went to watch The Rings of Power, got bored within 5 minutes, and went to watch something else if they were awake. The first paragraph once again repeats the headline. The Rings of Power Season 1 had a halo effect on the streamer's other tentpoles, according to the very unbiased, impartial studio boss of Amazon, Jennifer Salke. The Rings of Power dropped weekly on a Friday over the past 2 months and ended 4 days ago. Salke rejected the notion that there was an overwhelming pressure on the show to perform due to its multi-hundred-million-dollar price tag. There was not a lot of anxiety, she added. Of course the story has to be great, which it wasn't, and you have to love these characters, which no one did. If the show had fallen short of what audiences require, which it most definitely did, it would have felt like a disappointment. Oh, it's more than a disappointment, it's a massive failure. But it didn't. You need ambition, scope, and confidence to deliver on that, or to deliver this kind of bullshit. Then, unsurprisingly, the subject changes to other TV shows and other markets, including Nigeria. Speaking alongside Salke, head of International Originals James Farrell pointed out Nigeria as a major growth opportunity. The streamer recently unveiled its first originals in the African nation, and that's where the article ends. Certainly sounds like to me that they were digging to find anything positive to say, and I absolutely believe the Rings of Power will have a reverse halo effect in the next couple of weeks when no one's watching it. Amazon aren't the only ones who lost to the fandom. So did the activist Access Media, all one and the same. They're going through their own little cope session. This brings us to the New Statesman, which I have never heard of, and an unfortunately timed article by Mark Burrows, who is a blue check mark on Twitter, but so am I. Not sure how that happened, but I guess they're just giving it to anybody these days. Shows like The Rings of Power and She-Hulk have been runaway successes. Why can't keyboard warriors admit it? Happily, these shows have proven to be huge hits, extremely popular with audiences and critics alike, despite the trolling. Really now. We already know the punchline to this article, but let's see what young Mark Burrows has to say. The great doom was foreseen from the first moment the trailers hit. The first images were released and the first casting announced. Actually, I was a little before that. It was soon as J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay were announced with associations with Bad Reboot. This will be a disaster. I think I said something like that. This will end the studio. I did not say something like that, but I believe other outlets have. Fans have had enough. We certainly have. Which show? Basically all of them. Not all of them, just two in particular. She-Hulk and The Rings of Power. Critics on Twitter and YouTube said it about Amazon's The Rings of Power. They said it about Disney Plus's She-Hulk Attorney at Law. They said it about Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yes, I did say it about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that was a total disaster. How's Andor doing? Oops, I got ahead of myself. And these are just the most recent 3. Notice you didn't mention House of the Dragon. It was said they had been infected by woke agendas. They have, had no respect for their respective source material. They didn't, and that fans would eventually realize. They did. The Emperor would be revealed in all of his naked glory. Thankfully, in this case, the Star Wars shows only metaphorically. Yeah, I don't want to see Kathleen Kennedy or Jennifer Salke naked. Happily, all 3 shows have proven to be huge hits, extremely popular with audiences and critics alike. Really now. Notice there weren't any hyperlinks there, so we'll just go over to Rotten Tomatoes. She-Hulk has a 34%, Rings of Power has a 39%, and Obi-Wan has a still disappointing 64% audience score. But please do continue, young Matt Burrows. Only a month into the Rings of Power's run on Amazon, executives were claiming that the viewing figures were cresting towards 100 million. Actually, it was Jennifer Salke who claimed that without backing it up with any evidence, just like she couldn't back up that Rings of Power had a halo effect on any of their shows with any evidence, just like they didn't back up the 25 million viewers on the first day with any evidence. She-Hulk has been Disney Plus's top trending show on Disney Plus. So both Amazon and Disney are in the same position. We are both doing very well according to us, and is regularly in the top 10 streaming shows in the US. Not She-Hulk, we'll get to that later, according to Nielsen ratings. In the UK, where the ratings are more easily accessible because fewer people watch it, a respectable 1.6 million were clicking. Kenobi broke records for D+ in the beginning, achieving the service's biggest ever season debut, according to Disney, without providing any evidence. These shows received largely favorable reviews from the Access critics, who get free trips, free early screeners, free gift bags. I'm sure that's got nothing to do with those positive reviews. As well as, if you ignore the review bombing on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, and we've gone over this before, there's review bombing on both sides, with Rings praised for its visuals performances and for injecting intrigue into a story that few thought had any wiggle room. Who is Sauron became a water cooler conversation, except according to IndieWire, the Rings of Power wasn't built for the water cooler, and that's okay. Except everyone knew that Halbrand was Sauron from the first episode, and some of us knew it beforehand. Think these franchise fans that predicted Doom would be delighted. No, I'm not delighted that I was right about predicting Doom. I wanted this to do well. I wanted to be a fan of this show, but I couldn't because we all have this one thing that Mark Burrows doesn't, called taste. Their favorite properties have new iterations that have been popular and well received. Now we're just saying things hoping they're true. So why are these same people still calling those shows disasters? We'll get to that. It's almost as if people didn't enjoy it, jabs YouTuber Ryan Kinnell sarcastically to his 185,000 subscribers, my Friday Night Tights co-host of the She-Hulk finale. It's almost like nobody even watched this effing garbage, even though we know they did. Meanwhile, fellow streamer Nerdrotic, that's me, 577,000 subscribers. Well, it's 579,000 now, but who's counting? And 43% of you still haven't subbed yet. Maybe today's the day that happens. Was busy having his 2 cents worth on the Rings of Power. This is repurposed giant global disaster. I do recall saying that many times, and guess what? It's still a repurposed giant global disaster. He says of one of the most successful television shows of all time, which it isn't. Let's play what's more likely to be true. Is the Rings of Power one of the most successful television shows of all time, or is the Rings of Power one of the biggest flops of all time? I would argue for something to be successful, it needs to make money, and considering the price tag, this show hasn't done that yet, and it's already falling in the charts, which won't help it gain subscribers, hence make any money. The only cultural phenomenon that is going on around this series is with the Tolkien fans winning. It's an example of what I call agenda trolling, when a commenter's personal viewpoint, which honestly this is so firmly set that no evidence is going to shake them from it. Well, we'll get to that evidence in just a moment. What he says about fandom in general, but particularly fans who didn't like the She-Hulk finale because it was going after fans, and in turn Amazon has been going after fans, is probably the dumbest thing in this article. Small wonder that critics possessing such a limited and inflexible imagination with such a weirdly deliberate lack of empathy for the enjoyment of their fellow fans were never going to be bright enough to get the joke. First, let's go after Mark Burrows, who kind of went after me and Ryan and responded to me on Twitter and then later deleted the tweet, so I can't show you. He said he wasn't a shill, accepted no money from Amazon, but he'd like to because he could use the cash. Considering what I just read, I can see why. Hey, I've sucked at some jobs too, and I had to go out and find something I was good at. I suggest you do the same, Mark. But you are entitled to your opinion, and if somebody's willing to pay for it...
Oh, good for you!
As far as the Rings of Power being a success and one of the most successful shows of all time, the only evidence that we have for that is Jennifer Salke saying some shit. As far as evidence to the contrary is concerned, well, we'll go to the latest Nielsen's, which is only a portion of the audience. Rings of Power has fallen below House of the Dragon, and She-Hulk and Andor are nowhere to be found. Now, you can find them on the original streaming list, where Andor is number 6 and She-Hulk still nowhere to be found. Other signs your show might not be a success: the Access Media turning on it. From Forbes, the Rings of Power is making a mockery of Tolkien's work. From The Guardian, that originally said that Rings of Power embarrassed House of the Dragon, well, it certainly flip-flop on this one. Now that it's over, let's come out and say it. The Rings of Power was a stinker. Again, the Rings of Power was supposed to be a cultural phenomenon like Game of Thrones, and it turned out to be one, just not the way Amazon intended. It had nothing to do with the story or the characters, and everything to do with how they treated the fandom and the fandom's response. The culture war surrounding Rings of Power was more interesting than the series itself. It sounds like Forbes is almost there, but then they go on to call us all racist and misogynist and fascist adjacent. Still, there's massive cope from the Access Media. From Variety, did the Rings of Power fumble its release or just set itself up for success in season 2? Genius, they're playing 5D chess. We're gonna make our first season so bad you can't help but like season 2. Successful shows don't get ratioed at every turn. Successful shows don't have to resort to deleting thousands of comments on their trailers. Successful shows don't have to delete or manipulate reviews on a site that offers reviews that is owned by the parent company. Successful shows don't have to manipulate and delete reviews on the streaming service that hosts the show. Successful shows don't have to use the Access Media as a tool to attack fans. Winners do not vilify the paying customer. This is going to go down as the single dumbest move in entertainment history, or at the very least, the dumbest move since not putting Han, Luke, and Leia in a scene together. Making an enemy out of the Tolkien fandom. Be careful what you wish for, Jeff Bezos, because in a way, you did get your Game of Thrones Season 8 with Season 1 of The Rings of Power.
Best season ever!
A very united and very pissed fandom, and you should be thankful they're even that, because the next step is apathy. You also got Game of Thrones behind the scenes, apparently, with a lot of backstabbing that led to this disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed the one failure to rule them all, and, well, the best example outside of G4 of around with the fandom and find out. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I will see you in the next video.
Nerdrotic.com.
Cast it into the fire!